For the next hour, you'll be leaving the Show Me state and entering the Show Me the Money state. So stop what you're doing, grab a pen, and get ready to learn. Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group will be your guide for straight talk and honest answers about living the life you deserve in retirement. So prepare to be empowered. Now, here are your Show Me the Money hosts, Jake Floyd and Jeff Shade.
Thank you so much. Welcome to Show Me the Money, the radio show that gives you the straight talk and honest answers you need to help you reach your wealth management and retirement goals through smart investing and careful planning. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the economy is sending mixed signals. What does that mean for your retirement? Also, DIY retirement planning is saving the advisor fee actually costing you money? And then should you get out of the stock market in retirement? My name is Jeff Shade. As always, I'm just here to ask the questions, but the words of wisdom and solid advice, they come from Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group. Hey, Jake, how you doing this late August morning?
I'm doing great, Jeff. Thanks for asking.
Certainly welcome, my friend. I hope everybody's having a great weekend here in the last bastion of sanity, Springfield, Missouri. We've got a great show lined up for you today. Jake, we got a lot of economic information last week, and if I'm approaching retirement, I might be wondering what I'm supposed to make of it. The labor market appears to be slowing, but other parts of the economy are still growing. What is the big picture, in your opinion, about what's going on in the market and how it relates to those people who are getting ready for retirement?
Yeah, so honestly, what's taking shape here is something that we've been predicting here for quite a while. The advent of AI is going to put people out of work. And as that happens, that's going to drive profits for companies, and that's going to drive markets higher. I think that when we're looking at things like the jobs report, which we'll talk about here in a second, this is the beginning signs of what we've been expecting to see for quite a while. People tend to think, hey, if we're eliminating jobs, that's bad for the economy. And historically, they would be correct. But I think that the most dangerous 4 words in investing are, this time it's different. But I'm going to say, this time it's different. If we want to see precedent for this situation, you have to go all the way back to the Industrial Revolution. And while we saw a lot of jobs get automated in some ways there, and certain jobs went away and other jobs evolved to something else, I think we're going to see that again in the AI revolution. I don't think we're going to have like 30 or 40% unemployment or something crazy, but I do think 15%, maybe 20% of jobs will go away and be replaced by 5 to 15% new jobs. But I do think there will be a net job loss at some point during this. And so, as far as the average person listening to this, what you need to know is that asset prices are expensive, but they are going to get more expensive. And as we go through this, I would definitely not see this as a time to run for the hills. If anything, we want to make sure that we are positioned correctly to take advantage of what comes next.
Jake, let's talk about those employment numbers. What do we learn from the latest jobs number?
Well, the market has been really concerned about interest rate policy because of the jobs market. And if the jobs market remains strong, it's going to be hard for the Federal Reserve to not raise interest rates. So when we had this softer jobs number where there was more job openings, there were more people quitting and less jobs available and that kind of thing, we're starting to see the cracks in the job market. And again, a lot of people are like, oh, that's really bad. It is and it isn't. It depends on where you sit. If you're a 25, 30-year-old with 4 kids and a house you can barely afford, then yes, it's bad. If you are sitting on retirement assets and you're 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, and you have money invested, this may be one of the best times ever in history for you over the next 5 to 10 years.
Jake, does the jobs report or employment actually affect almost everything else in the economy? Is it really the top dog?
Jeff, I would say that probably jobs is not the most important thing. I would say that probably the inflation report is bigger. The GDP report's probably a little bigger, and then jobs, though, probably in that order. That being said, though, there's been a lot of scrutiny and a lot of questioning of the numbers recently, even by our new Fed president. I really do think that a lot of these numbers you have to take with a grain of salt because they are being cooked by the people putting them out. That was certainly the case during the Biden administration. It was very easy to see where they would say, hey, we created 100,000 new jobs this month, and then next month they would go back and revise those numbers, say, well, it was only 50, and then next month they'd go back 2 months and say, well, we actually didn't create any jobs. And so they were basically just lying up front, saying we created these jobs and then eliminating it off the books during what's called revisions, quote unquote. So the numbers are not the be all end all. I would use common sense and I would use your eyes to look around and say, what do I see happening? And I got to be honest with you, Jeff, I don't see any slowing down anywhere. When you go out to eat, prices are double what they were 5 years ago, depending on what we're talking about.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to stop people from going out to eat much. You know, if you go to try to make a reservation at a nice restaurant, you better do it in advance because they are booked out, man. And if you try to show up at Lambert's or Texas Roadhouse or someplace that has a lot of demand, you know, you're going to wait. If it's prime time, you're going to wait an hour, hour and a half. When the prices are double and people are still waiting, that does not sound like a suffering economy, a suffering consumer to me.
Jake, we also got a productivity report last week. It doesn't get nearly the attention of the jobs report, but there was some encouraging news there.
Yeah, so productivity, there's quite a few different reports. I believe the one you're mentioning was the big one with non-farm productivity and all that kind of thing on there. But a lot of the ISM manufacturing stuff has been looking really good too. So this has been quietly happening under the radar. Now, I think it's important. Trump is obviously capable of taking his own victory laps and does frequently, right? But at the same time, I think it's good to give credit where it's due. I mean, people said that he would never get GDP to 2% in 2024. And we've been running GDP way above 2%. And a lot of that is pro-business policies that this president has brought in. So it's important to acknowledge the fact, because Trump is so polarizing and people don't want to bring him up. They don't want to talk about him. People on the right don't want to ever oppose anything he has to say, and people on the left never, ever, 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 ever want to agree with anything he has to say. I think it's important to take stock of what he has done. Again, there's been some things that I don't like that he's done, but by and large, I'm a pretty big fan of his policies. And certainly, if you're an investor, you would have to be a big fan of his policies. And I think one other thing, Jeff, that's kind of not on our bullet point list here, but I think last Monday, NVIDIA had a summit with 6 of the world's largest banks, Goldman Sachs, Apollo, BlackRock, and basically they got together and said, hey, we need to not put burden on the government to build out AI infrastructure, AI power, all that kind of thing. So we're going to put together a fund that's investable for people to raise $500 billion so that we can build all this out privately. And for those listening and that have been watching the news for the last couple of years, you'll remember that Trump said, hey, we're not going to pay for it. We're going to make the companies pay for it. And this is evidence of that happening. And if you're going to have one company that was on board, NVIDIA would be the one you'd want. So we're starting to see almost everything he said he was going to do, he's in some stage of trying to do. And I think it's important we give him credit for that.
Talking with Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group, we're talking about economic news and what it means to you. That's really the lesson from all of these economic reports, Jake, is that one week the headlines tell you the economy is slowing. The next report tells you a major part of the economy is still expanding. And then we start debating what the Federal Reserve might do next. But your retirement can't be based on guessing the next jobs report or the inflation numbers or interest rate decisions. So if you're within 5 years of retirement or already retired, this is a really good time to find out whether your financial plan is prepared for more than just the economic outcome. Jake and the team here at Floyd Financial Group can sit down with you and look at your income, your investments, your Social Security, your taxes, and the risks that could affect your retirement. Our number, 417-889-7233. Again, it's 417-889-7233. That is a number that you'll call to request your complimentary Floyd Financial Group retirement review with Jake. It's just a casual conversation to see where you are, to see if the numbers are right, and if they're not, to give you a chance to correct them. And again, it's not going to cost you a dime, no cost, no obligation, and certainly no judgment. We'll meet you where you are. Don't wait for the next bad economic headline to find out whether your retirement strategy is prepared for it. Call 417-889-7233. We would love to talk to you. Jake, time for a break. When we come back here on Show Me the Money, we'll be talking about DIY retirement planning. Is saving the advisor fee actually costing you money? When our program continues here on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
Ready for another helping of some more real money talk? Thought so. Now, here's another serving of Show Me the Money with your hosts, Jake Floyd and Jeff Shea.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd, and in this segment, we're going to be talking about DIY retirement planning. Is saving the advisor fee actually costing you money?
And Jake, there's never been an easier time to manage your own money. You can open an account online. You can buy an index fund with a couple of clicks. You can use retirement calculators on the internet, and you can do it all without paying a financial advisor. And you can do it all in your underwear if you want. So here's the question, Jake. Why shouldn't I just do my retirement planning myself and save the fee?
So I think the simple one-sentence answer for that, and we'll expand on this, is people don't have the stomach for it. It's easy to say, hey, I'll just buy an S&P 500 index fund and hold it until the cows come home, which is not necessarily a broken strategy. But during COVID, would you have had the stomach to stay, to not sell? Because if you sold in March, you cost yourself 20, 30%. And that's if you got back in relatively quickly. Some people didn't ever get back in. And in that case, you cost yourself 200%. So whether it comes to the market itself and having a stomach for it, or whether it comes to the knowledge that comes with having a financial advisor, hopefully you're only going to retire one time in your entire life. You don't want to have to go back and be a Walmart greeter or whatever. So if you're going to do it, you're going to do it once. And here I have been a part of, I was trying to calculate exactly how many people it would have been. I would guess it's a roughly 1,500 people's retirement at this point. And it might be a little higher than that, but that's a conservative estimate. And so I simply have seen things that you have not seen because I have been around this business for so long. And there's little potholes that can reach out and grab you if you're not careful as you're driving down the retirement road. And having a guide who travels that road 1,000 times a day can say, hey, over there on the left, there's a pothole. You want to avoid that one. Hey, over there in the middle of the road, let's straddle that pothole, make sure it doesn't rip our front end off our car. The value in an advisor is not necessarily the return, although that's part of it. And most people would probably get a better return if they had an institutional investment advisor. In fact, research has been done on this where the average retail investor makes 3 or 4% a year, and the average institutional investor, not being risk constrained, meaning in the equity markets, is something like 10 or 11% per year. And most of that is because of emotion. The average person, if it's their money and they see it go down, their natural instinct is to sell. When in reality, you probably should be buying there, depending on what's going on. Conversely, when everything looks really good and it looks like it's never going to come down again and it's going to be just amazing forever, that's when you should be raising cash and being careful, not buying more and more and more and more and more. And so you're always buying when you should be selling and selling when you should be buying. And there's too much emotion in your retirement and your money for the average person to successfully do it themselves. Now, there are people that can do it, and my hat is off to them. But at the same time, most people would benefit from having a financial Sherpa or a guide, if you will.
Jake, I think that most people, when they think of retirement planning, it's beating the market. But there is so much more to that. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that a financial planner such as yourself is involved with that isn't necessarily beating the market?
Yeah, so there's a lot of little questions that come along the way. And as far as the market's concerned, I want to be clear that I want to make people a very good return. And most years, that's going to be the case. And when we're comparing ourselves to, quote unquote, the market, whether we're talking about the Dow or the S&P or the bond market or whatever it is that we're talking about, it is very important to get as good a return as possible. However, once you arrive at retirement, you have done the accumulation phase of your retirement journey, meaning from the time you were 20 to the time you're 65 or whatever age you decide to retire, you've accumulated that money. Now, the biggest job you have is to not screw it up. And heaven knows a good way to screw it up is to have a 2008 poor timing come along and wipe out 53% of your retirement portfolio like it did in 2008 and 9. So I would say that probably the big one is avoiding big mistakes. That is probably the number one reason you should consider hiring an advisor if you don't have one, because sometimes you don't know the mistakes you might make. I can think of a gentleman that I know, and he was an early investor in Tesla, and he made a fortune in Tesla. I think he turned roughly $400,000 into about $12 million.
Wow.
And He had the world by the tail, so to speak, right? And so he talks to his daughter a little bit, and his daughter says, hey, you should really diversify this stock. So he ends up selling I think a couple $1 million of it. And what he didn't realize is the amount of tax he was going to have to pay. And then once he paid the tax because of IRMA, he also went to the max IRMA bracket. So he's paying an additional $500 a month or close to it at the time for his Medicare Part B, both for him and for his wife. And he calls me and he says, well, how do I fix this? I said, well, you go back in a time machine 30 days ago and you call me before you do it. And we can be a little more creative about how we go about it. But that was a pothole that he didn't know existed. And is the guy a great investor? I mean, one could say he turned a little bit of money into a whole lot of money. That doesn't necessarily make him a great investor. He might have just got lucky. And that being said, he has done very well. But he only retired once. And that was one of the potholes that he had never seen before. And let me assure you, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of these potholes out there. And having somebody with their eye on your retirement and making sure that you're not hitting all these potholes as you go down the road and making big mistakes, I think is probably the biggest reason to consider an advisor.
Again, we're talking with Jake Floyd, Floyd Financial Group, and we're talking about the DIY investor and why you may be leaving money on the table or actually losing money if you're not using a financial advisor. Our phone number, 417-889-7233, if you'd like your complimentary Floyd Financial Group retirement review. Here's something that I think, Jake, most people do not even consider. They've got, let's say, $100,000 in the bank and $500,000 in an IRA, maybe another $200,000 in a Roth. They need $30,000. Which account should it come from? Withdrawal order. That is something that I think DIY investors may have a problem with.
Yeah, and I think that order is not necessarily stagnant. Sometimes it is, and depending on the client's goals, we might take proportionate income from each bucket, but in some situations, we want to utilize money. You know, if the market has been up big and has stayed up big, we might use more of that money while it's up as retirement income so that it doesn't drag down the value of our safe investments as we're taking income out of there. So we may shift it during your retirement from one bucket to the other, or even if it's just a nudge, maybe we're taking half and half, or like made a whole bunch of money in the market. Let's change it to where it's 70% out of the market, 30% out of safe investments, for an example. So this is something that happens during the review process when we get together with people every 90, 180 days or so, maybe once a year, depending on the situation. But as we get together, we kind of feel out, okay, how's retirement going? How's the income situation? Are we getting too far out of whack with our safe money versus our risk money? You know, if the market's been really good over the last 4 or 5 years, there's a lot of people that have way more money now in the market as a percentage than they do in their safe bucket. So we might need to revisit that. But as far as income's concerned, yeah, it's not necessarily stagnant. And I could see how people would struggle with where to take that money from. There's also liquidity to be considered. We don't want to spend all of your liquid money all at once. So if we have free withdrawal provisions and annuities, or if you have CDs in the bank, you know, as we're spending this money, we might need to reallocate as we go from time to time to make sure that you stay balanced and that when another 2008 or 2000 comes along, we're not going to just get totally wiped out.
Jake, the tax code is so voluminous, it's bigger than War and Peace. It makes War and Peace look like a paperback novel. I mean, that is something I've thought about. If I were trying to do this myself, there's no way that I could navigate the tax code. There's no way that I could take advantage of the opportunities that may exist. Can you talk a little bit about tax planning as far as a DIY investor goes, as opposed to someone like yourself and the team that you have there?
So to be totally honest, Jeff, it's too much for me to manage too.
Yeah.
That's why I have people that I can tap if I get out of my depth, you know.
Right.
So being here 20 years, though, there's a lot of basic tax stuff that some people may not be aware of that I am very well versed in. There's a lot of things that I understand about taxes, but if there's something unique that comes up that I don't know, I am not afraid to say, hey, I don't know, but I know somebody who does.
Right.
And having people around you that can really fill almost any gap is good. Again, 99% of the time I'm going to be fine and I'm not going to need any help there, but sometimes we have complicated situations and it's good to have somebody to tap for those.
Jake, let's look at some places where the do-it-yourself investor or retiree could potentially leave money on the table. It seems simple. Social Security, you take it at either 62, full retirement age, or 70. Can you talk a little bit about how Social Security planning and how it impacts taxes and so forth is something that is a little more complex than people think on the surface?
Yeah, if you have a traditional marriage and traditional family and you're close in age, it can be relatively simple. But I will say that a lot of people don't have that, right? They'll have a big age gap, or maybe it's a second marriage, or maybe you have a blended family. And there are things to consider when that happens. Maybe you were a homemaker and your spouse worked all the career and you stayed home and took care of the kids and that kind of thing. And if that's the case, you can be left kind of in the dust from a Social Security standpoint, from an income standpoint. And so there's considerations for those things as well. We need to consider taxes, other income. We need to consider what happens if one spouse passes away before the other one, especially if it's significantly before the other one. And all those things have an effect on when we take Social Security. I have a little more simplistic view than most people about it, but that doesn't mean that we don't consider all these things when we make a decision.
Okay, Jake, let's address the elephant in the room here. The financial advisor isn't working completely for free. Suppose somebody says, Jake, why should I pay somebody when I can do this myself?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the question is your advisor bringing value equal or greater to the fee you're paying? And I think some of that has to do with return. Some of that has to do with accessibility, communication. Is he or she available when you need questions answered? Sometimes I have people that call me and say, hey, I want to buy a new truck. Why don't you cash out part of my retirement account? It's going to cost me $80,000 because I'm getting a nice truck. That means with taxes and everything, which sometimes people don't consider taxes. They're like, give me $80,000. Well, that's going to cost you $30,000 in taxes. Are you sure you want to do that? And it depends on the person, right? The income. I'm not saying it's always $30,000, but that's likely something like what it would cost. And like, whoa, $30,000 in taxes? What? Like, well, I still have to have a car. What do I do? Do I buy a used car? What do I do? Do I buy a new car? Do I finance the car? And so I'm here for those types of questions. I don't have to be involved in those, but if you want counsel on those things, I'm here for that. Same with buying a house, same with any big purchase. If you'll allow me to be part of the conversation and we can say, hey, maybe if we do things this way, it'll cost us less in taxes and just keep more money in your pocket. But there's a lot of different things to consider. And I think bringing value to the situation is the number one thing I'm concerned about. Sometimes I don't bring people on as clients, not because I don't like them or because I don't want to make money, but because I don't know that I'm going to bring enough value to justify what I charge, especially in younger people that have very little saved. What I would have to charge them to bring them on is cost prohibitive. You know, I'd rather just give them some tips and then check in with them every few years and see how they're doing. Then maybe it makes sense at some point. But as far as fees go, I am, to my knowledge, the least expensive advisor in the area. I try to keep my fees very low because it is a high corollary with success, how much you're paying in fees. If you have low fees, you generally do better than if you have high fees, right? But not having any fees and not having any counsel or any guidance and just kind of feeling around in the dark can cost you a whole lot more than 1% per year or whatever the fee is on the advisor that you're looking at.
And I want to emphasize something, Jake, for our listeners. We're not saying that everybody managing their money is doing it wrong. Not at all. Some people enjoy it. Some people are extremely knowledgeable. Some have relatively simple financial situations. They do a very good job. But I would encourage DIY investors approaching retirement to ask themselves one question: what don't I know that I don't know? And maybe that is the takeaway today. The question isn't whether you're smart enough to manage your own money. You may have done a terrific job. In fact, you've accumulated several $100,000 or maybe even $1 million or more. You've obviously done things right. But saving for retirement and successfully distributing that money through retirement are two different jobs. Social Security, taxes, Roth conversions, RMDs, Medicare investment, risk withdrawal strategies, and making sure your income lasts as long as you do. There may be opportunities that you're simply not aware of. That's where Jake and the team here at Floyd Financial Group can help you out. Have them take a look at what you're doing right now and ask a very simple question: are there opportunities in my retirement plan that I'm missing? Call 417-889-7233 if you'd like a second set of eyes on what you're doing with Jake and the team here at Floyd Financial Group. Again, it's 417-889-7233. No cost and no obligation. We'd love to talk to you. We're also online at FloydFinancialGroup.com. Jake, time for a break. When we come back, taxes don't end when you retire. All that and more when the program continues here on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
We're back with your financial catch of the day, and it's a big one. Here's more Show Me the Money Radio with your hosts, Jake Floyd and Jeff Shea.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd, and in this segment, we're going to be talking about taxes don't end when you retire.
And Jake, I think a lot of people assume that once they retire, their taxes are going to get a whole lot simpler, or they're going to go away. But that is not necessarily true, is it?
Sometimes it is. I would say it's more true in this area than anywhere, but I would say that's maybe 20-30% of people fit that bill where it either gets really simple or goes away entirely. A lot of that has to do with how much you have saved. The better you've done saving, the more complicated your situation is probably, and the more taxes you may end up paying if you have a lot of money, right? But I would say that in general, most people pay less taxes in retirement than they do when they're working because their top line income is simply less. But we still have to keep an eye on taxes. And, a lot of people are like, well, if I get $2,000 a month for my Social Security and $2,000 a month for my investments, then I get $4,000 a month, right? Especially if you still have a spouse that's working or something like that, we have to hold taxes out of there. And so you may end up with $1,600 a month or something like that from your investments. So these are all things that we need to keep an eye on so that we don't get to tax season and be like, oh, by the way, you owe $3,000 plus penalty because you didn't pay enough into the system. So we take care of all that. That's circling back to the last segment as far as why an advisor has value. This is another big reason, is if you're doing things yourself and you're just taking income out of your retirement plans, if you do not have withholding done correctly, you technically should be paying quarterly taxes, quarterly tax payments. And if you don't do that and you don't know to do that, then you get penalized at the end of the year or the beginning of next year for this year if you have not paid enough into the system in a timely manner. So we handle all that for our clients so that you don't have to mess with it. We automate those payments so you get paychecks just like you do when you're at work. We'll set those up whenever you like the income to come in. So when we're looking at taxes in general, it's probably one of the top 3 things to worry about in retirement.
And Jake, a lot of people think that basically April is the time that you think about taxes, but if I'm hearing you correctly, this is an integral part of a financial plan. You're thinking about taxes all year round. Can you expand a little bit on some of the things that you do to mitigate taxes? Because some people are paying more in taxes than they actually need to.
Sure, that's true. And there's all kinds of different things we can do, from tax deferred accounts like annuities. If we have a bunch of after-tax money sitting around in CDs, not only can we likely do better return-wise by using other products, but if inside of an annuity, if you have after-tax money, you can defer the taxes on those until you take the money out. And then therefore you are paying less taxes and then earning more money on the money you otherwise would have paid in taxes. So that's a single example. But there's a lot of different ways that taxes can come into play. There's things that seem like taxes that are not technically taxes, like IRMA or Obamacare's subsidy, right? If you make too much money, they charge you more for Medicare Part B or for Obamacare if you're not 65 yet. And if we spend money from savings early on instead of taking it out of a retirement account, that doesn't count as income. And so your actual income is then lower, so you get a larger subsidy or you pay less for Medicare Part B. Again, that's not technically a tax, but that's something we definitely want to keep an eye on, is health insurance and how much it costs, because it can cost a fortune if we don't watch out.
And Jake, last segment we were talking about some of the things that Donald Trump has done that we agree with. One of them that I'm a big proponent of is his tax plan. We're in a historically low tax environment right now. I'm really enjoying the standard deduction and a lot of other things that have been positive about taxes. Do you plan for taxes to go down, to stay the same, to go up when Donald Trump is out of office? And how important is it for people to expect that taxes are going to be going up, or maybe they're just not going to be the same?
So in other words, you want me to prognosticate?
I don't know. Do you think it's really prognostication to think that taxes are going to remain the same when there's such a budget deficit as there is right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's an educated guess. First of all, if anybody's been listening to the show for a long time, they'll know that I'm very prone to prognostication. So
okay.
I thought you'd never ask. So when it comes to taxes, there's a lot of people really worried that taxes are going to go up in a big way after Trump or after some event. So the big thing we have to remember when it comes to taxes is Congress is greedy and worried about themselves. They're self-interested. Congress wants to be like Mitch McConnell and be in there for 40 years, right? Or Nancy Pelosi or whoever. If they start going around and say, hey, we're going to raise taxes on 98% of people, guess who's never going to get elected again?
Yeah.
So I do not share the fear that a lot of the people who align with me politically have about taxes going up on the vast majority of people. I do think at some point, if you belong to the 1 or 2% of highest income people, that taxes will go up at some point. However, if you are the bottom 98%, so let's say you're making 150, 200,000 or less a year in income, joint household income, I personally do not believe that taxes are going to go up meaningfully for the foreseeable future. I do think that Trump's temporary extra deduction that we got as a consolation prize for there still being tax on Social Security, over the age of 65, you get an extra $6,000 deduction.
Right.
I do think that will go away. So that will, in effect, kind of be a tax increase. But we just got it to come down, and it lasts through the end of 28. And then after that has to be repassed if we're going to keep it. I don't know that we'll keep that. That might go away. But I don't think we're going to have big, large-scale tax increases on the public, because the economic effect of that would be way more detrimental than the debt that's accumulating because we are running a budget deficit. As Trump has said, and others have said, the only real way to fix this problem is to grow our way out of it. So try to keep a lid on spending, cut spending where we can, but grow the economy so that the tax revenue grows to fit our budget. That's the only real solution that we have that doesn't involve little ladies starving to death in their houses because we took Social Security away or something like that. The entitlement spending in this country alone is more than the entire tax revenue. Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security is more than the entire tax revenue. So unless we're ready to cut those things, which I don't know that the vast majority of people are for various reasons. I mean, there's some trimming here and there I think we should do, but I don't know that we should get rid of Social Security. You know, I think there'll be a lot of people taking issue with that, right?
Yeah.
If we're not going to do that, the only real way to fix the problem is to grow the economy 2 or 3x, and then our revenue will go up 2 or 3x, and then we can balance the budget. So that's what Trump is trying to lay the groundwork to do. That's what smart economists have said. That's the only real solution. Running the debt up to 15 zeros is probably not a realistic solution. And at some point, we're going to have to figure out how to balance this thing. And again, I think if cooler heads prevail, if we can manage the government, if we can stop them from throwing money out of every open window and keep it to just the essentials, I do think balancing the budget's possible. But if you're asking me, are taxes going to go up? I don't think so. And are we actually going to ever balance this budget? Probably not.
Talking with Jake Floyd, Floyd Financial Group, and we're talking about tax mitigation in retirement and whether or not your taxes go away. We certainly have determined that they do not go away in retirement. So, Jake, when you talk to the DIY investors, they say, well, the Roth is the answer here. Does that mean that everybody should start putting everything into a Roth?
So I have a little bit of a controversial opinion here, and I will say that I think most people should not be funding a Roth. There are some people that should be, but by and large, if you have, especially if you're married and you have 2 working spouses that are in prime earning years, you're likely in a high enough tax bracket where it doesn't make sense, in my opinion, to fund a Roth. Once we cross over into the 22% bracket, I don't think it makes sense to pay 22 to the Fed and 3 to 5 to the state. So 27% maybe off the top to fund a Roth. I would rather fund 27% more money into my retirement plan and earn that money tax deferred. And then when we take it out, we're likely to be in a lower tax bracket than we are now. So we save it in the higher tax bracket and use it in a lower tax bracket. Now, that does assume that taxes are not going to go way, way, way up in the future. They would have to go up quite a lot for that not to hold water, but anything's possible. But I'm generally a fan of Roth if you are making total household income under 90,000 or single income under 40, 45,000, 50,000, let's say. So there's nothing wrong with a Roth, but I would say that it is not magic. You are giving up the money now to save it later. versus saving it now to pay taxes on it later. So it is an age-old question. If you're curious about doing Roth conversion, or if you're curious whether you should be funding Roth or not, those are some of the things we can talk about when you come in for your consultation.
Jake, here's one that seems backward to me. Why would somebody ever voluntarily take money out of an IRA and pay the taxes before they absolutely have to?
Yeah, so there are a few reasons for that. One would be Roth conversion, if that made sense for you. Another one would be if you wanted that money to be in trust, or if you wanted to spend it on a business or something like that, or a purchase without doing like a self-directed IRA or something like that, where you can systematically spend that money or take it out and pay the taxes so that you can have it to spend instead of busting it all in 1 year. There's a lot of different reasons why we might do that. Asset protection trusts can help mitigate damage from nursing home costs and things like that, but you cannot put retirement accounts into trust. And so systematically taking it out of the IRA allows you to protect it inside of a trust for various creditors and that kind of thing. So there are a lot of reasons why that might happen. Sometimes that doesn't make sense, right? But there are potential reasons to pay taxes maybe before you have to, and it gives you a little more freedom with your money.
Jake, here's something that married couples probably don't want to think about. Eventually, there is a reasonable chance that one spouse is going to be managing the money alone because of the loss of the other spouse. Can taxes change then?
Yeah, this is probably the biggest threat to somebody as they get older, is if you have a spouse that passes away, especially if it's a spouse that makes more money, has more retirement income, maybe has a pension that doesn't survive and that kind of thing. Can go from $7,000 a month to $2,000 a month, and we need to make sure that we're covering the risk there somehow, either with life insurance or asset wise. How are we going to make up that gap? And I do see this quite often where we have a couple and they retire and one of them passes away early, and then maybe the other one lives another 20 or 30 years. We need to make sure that you're prepared for that. And tax wise, the government just seems to hate single people because you get way less synergies filing as a single than you do filing jointly. Now, if you happen to make the same income and the same expenses, same overall investment setup, it's not that big a deal. But usually there's some pretty good disparity, and it generally will save a lot of money in tax to be able to file jointly. And when you're forced to file as a single, that first year can really hit you tax-wise.
Jake, let's bring this home for somebody listening today who's thinking, this sounds pretty complicated. Where do we even start with this?
Yeah, start with what you already have. If you have a 401k at work, get your 401k statement out, get your IRA statement out, look at your savings, look at your Social Security. If you have a pension, what does that look like? Does it survive to your spouse? How much is it? What tax consequences could happen when you start taking that money out? You don't necessarily have to be a tax expert. Professionals are out there to help, myself and other tax professionals, other financial advisors, but you want to have a plan for how that's going to happen to you so that it doesn't just blindside you someday. And you need to be realistic about what you're going to need to live on and how much you're going to pay in taxes, because retirement isn't just about building a big pile of money. It's about turning that money into an income you can actually live on.
And maybe that's the important point today. Jake isn't your accountant. Floyd Financial Group isn't preparing your tax return. But if you're 5 years away from retirement or you're already retired, there are financial decisions that you're making today that could affect the taxes that you pay tomorrow. Which account do you take the money from? When do you start taking Social Security? Should you consider a Roth? How are you going to replace your paycheck? What happens financially if one spouse passes away? Those are retirement planning questions. So if you've got a 401k, IRA, pension, or retirement savings, you're wondering how all those pieces are supposed to work together, sit down with Jake and the team here at Floyd Financial Group and have that conversation about taxes. Our phone number, 417-889-7233. You can make that call today if you want. Leave your name and number. Ashley will call you back during the week and set up that casual conversation with Jake. Absolutely no cost and no obligation. It's 417-889-7233. You've spent your life working, trying to figure out how to save money. Now it's time to have a plan for how you're going to use it and how you're going to keep the most that you can relevant to taxes. Jake, it is time for a break. We come back here on Show Me the Money. We're going to be talking about should you get out of the stock market in retirement when our show continues on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
Ready to climb a mountain of financial know-how? Good, because it's time for more Show Me the Money with your financial Sherpa, Jake Floyd.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd, and in this segment, we're going to be talking about how much should you really have in stocks during retirement.
Jake, there's an old rule of thumb that says the older you get, the more money you should move out of stocks and into bonds. In fact, Vanguard founder Jack Bogle once talked about using your age as your percentage in bonds. So if you're 65, the old formula could mean 65% bonds. Is that still a good way to think about retirement investing?
Spoken like a bond guru, if you ask me. But yeah, I could make any kind of rule and make it say whatever I want. But Mr. Bogle, I will say, I think had his heart in the right place, but I think that's a little antiquated in today's world. There's a lot of other financial products out there that can probably do a better job of diversifying and maybe making a little more money than the bond market has. If you've been a bond investor over the last while, you'll know that bonds really have not been that great for the last 10 or 15 years. Now, they're starting to look a little better at this level, but we're still exposed to interest rate risk and things like that. The way I always kind of interpret it is if you're 65, we take your age and subtract it from 100, and that's how much you should have at risk, so 35% at risk. I think that's too conservative. If I were going to modify that, I would say, let's take your age from 100, add 15, and then that's how much you should have at risk. So if you're 65, I like being pretty balanced, 50-50, all things equal. Now, everybody's different. There's a lot of different considerations, but I think that 35-65 is pretty conservative, and unless you have a pile of money saved, that might not be enough earnings potential to get you where you want to be, especially if you're wanting to live off the interest and pass on to your beneficiaries the principal. We might need a little more juice than that.
Jake, I think some of our listeners may be saying, I've spent 40 years building this money. I can't afford to lose it now. What's wrong with getting very, very conservative at age 65 and absolutely not wanting to take any risk at all?
Well, probably the biggest risk that comes to mind, all things equal, is your spending power is declining every year, whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not. And if you do not keep up with that, then your ability to live diminishes every year that you don't earn money. So it's not so much about just being a multi-gazillionaire. It's more about having the power to offset inflation and the devaluing of the dollar that happens even in a healthy economy year over year to some extent, 2%, 3% a year. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And I don't have the time to go into the macroeconomics of that, but your spending power gets less. So you do need to make some money as you go forward if you want to have your buying power remain the same.
Jake, there are a lot of advisors who use what we call the bucket strategy, but you don't necessarily subscribe to that. Why is that?
Yeah, the traditional bucket strategy says, hey, I divide my money into 3 buckets. I have one that I'm spending now, and then I have one that's set up to be spent next, and that takes all the pressure off the 3rd bucket so that it can grow and grow and grow, and then we spend it when we get there. The problem with that is you have to watch your first bucket spend to nothing, and a lot of people are not comfortable with that. Even if the other buckets are growing, they're like, yeah, but this one bucket is going down, 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 down. And so I think that was more viable when bonds were paying 7 or 8% interest and CDs were paying 6% interest and that kind of thing. You could do these different buckets and with relative degree of certainty know that you're going to replace what you're spending in the first bucket. The other problem with the bucket approach is you're probably not going to be able to spend 5 or 6% of your money per year if you want to in a bucket strategy because it's just not earning enough money on guaranteed interest in today's world. So there's nothing inherently wrong with the bucket strategy other than it's a little bit antiquated today. And generally what I would like to do is understand what we want out of retirement, understand what we want to spend money on, get our spending needs where we need them, and then divide money accordingly to make sure we have enough liquidity and enough safety, but otherwise focus on growing the money. A lot of times I will set up proportionate income from any of the different buckets of money that we have, meaning if I have money in the market, I have money in savings or an annuity or whatever. If there's $1 million and there's 500,000 in the market and 200,000 in CDs and 300,000 in annuity, then we would take 50% of the money from the market and 20% of the money from the CD and 30% of the money from the annuity or whatever. A lot of times that makes sense. And then as we go forward, like I said earlier in the show, if we get into a situation where the market's up really big and we're concerned about it going down, we might shift our income to the market side that's made more money. Or conversely, if the market's down a lot, we might want to shift it away from the market and give it time to recover. So this is something that's an ongoing evaluation that we do when we get together, and it may stay the same for 10 years and then we might change it, or we might do it for 1 year and change it, or we may never change it. But there's a lot of considerations that you don't necessarily have to do, but me as the advisor, I think about this a lot and where we should be pulling income from to just maximize the numbers overall.
Jake, I talk to a lot of people who are 65 plus who are retired, and they say, I absolutely do not want to take any risk whatsoever in retirement. I want just safe money, investments, cash, and cash equivalents. I mean, right now, CD rates, good one, maybe 4.5%. Money market's pretty much the same. If inflation is a tad under 4%, it would occur to me that you're not even keeping up with inflation, or you're just barely doing that. Is it a mistake in retirement to not think bigger than that we need some safe money, but we also need some money at risk that's going to give us a better return than 4 and 4.5%?
Yeah, so there's basically 3 components to investing. There's growth, there's safety, there's liquidity. It's okay if we don't want any risk and we want to maximize safety, but that means we have to be willing to give up one of those other two. We either have to give up growth or we have to give up liquidity to maximize safety. And so a lot of times, somebody that's just really like, I don't ever want to watch my money go down under any circumstances, they either need to have saved a really big pile of money, or they need to be okay with tying the money up. If we're able to tie the money up a little bit, you can squeeze a little more return out of there than, let's say, what CDs or money markets are paying. And in some cases, quite a bit more. And we can tie some of those investments to the market without actually putting them in the market. There's a lot of different investment products out there in today's world worth considering, especially with interest rates where they are. But I do have people that do that. They say, I really don't want to have to worry about risking it. Either I'm willing to live on a little bit less, or maybe you've just saved plenty of money and you just don't need to live on a lot anyway. We absolutely can set it up where you have no risk. But I will probably try to explain to you why it might make sense to have at least a little bit where it can make more money and be liquid for you. But again, if you don't want any risk, we can absolutely do that.
Jake, I was reading an article about this risk, and basically that's what our topic is based off of today. And something that surprised me, it suggests that there may not be a reason to keep getting more and more conservative at 75, 80, and 85. Do you agree with that? Or, when you're 75, should the risk go down? 80, go down even more? 85, absolutely no risk. What's your opinion about that?
It depends on your goals. If your goal is to maximize your inheritance to your kids, then maybe that is appropriate, right? Because you have less and less need for it, and the goal is to pass it on, and you have less time. However, if your goal is to spend what you want to spend and the kids will get what's left over, I agree, Jeff. I think that that's a little bit overrated. A lot of what it comes down to, risk tolerance, risk capacity wise, is what do you have the stomach for? Over the last 10 years, the S&P 500's returned like 14.6% or something, which is destroying what most people are getting, right? And we don't have to always do whatever the S&P is doing, but at the same time, if you just simply bought it and held it, that's what you would have gotten. So the question is, can you buy it and hold it? And can you not panic? Most people will need to have a considerable amount of safe money to endure the raw volatility of the S&P 500. Most people can't just sit there and put their money in and not worry about it. I have a guy that comes to mind, and I don't know if he's listening, but a long time ago, that's what he did. He went out to Vanguard and he bought a Vanguard 500 fund, and he's had it like 30 years, and he's never put in anything else. And he has made a boatload of money, but the guy has ice in his veins. And when the market went down in March of this year, it went down 10%. He was down $1.5 million, but he didn't panic. He didn't worry about it. He didn't even think about it. He doesn't even view it as an option to sell it. He just leaves it forever. There are people that can do that, but most people either can't do that from an income standpoint, can't do it from an emotion standpoint, can't do it from a sleeping at night standpoint. And again, that's not necessarily the right strategy anyway, depending on your timing and all that. But most people they have to be able to sleep at night, and they can't sleep at night if their portfolio is up tens of thousands of dollars or down tens of thousands of dollars every day.
Jake, when people think about taking risk in retirement and equities, they primarily think about the stock market. But what are some of the other alternatives to the stock market that people might want to think about in retirement?
Yeah, so there are direct corollaries where we still use the stock market, but we don't actually put our money in the market, such as like fixed indexed annuities, which we've talked about on here. And again, I always like to say that I'm not just out here to sell everybody an annuity. There's a lot of people that annuity is not right for. I don't want to just come out here and drone on about annuities, but in today's world, with interest rates where they are, a fixed indexed annuity can give you growth linked to the market with no downside risk. And a lot of people like that. The catch, if there is one, is that we have to tie the money up to do it. And so that's one way. Structured notes is another one where it works kind of similar to the annuity, but we don't have to lock our money up. But if we want to get out in the middle, there's some potential, we can take a loss there a little bit. There's other types of annuities like RILAs, that registered index-linked annuities that can track markets with some protection, but maybe not full protection. And we can invest in pretty much everything under the sun, from gold to crypto to bonds, annuities like we talked about, obviously the stock market. So the way we set things up here, we wanted to be able to use whatever tool was right for the job for people. And that's why there's not some big wirehouse name on the front of my building, because they dictate what their people can do for their clients. And I don't like that. I want to do whatever is in the best interest of my client 100% of the time.
Jake, we talk about risk tolerance and risk capacity. Can you explain the difference between those two?
Yeah, risk tolerance, Jeff, is what you are comfortable taking risk-wise, meaning what's not going to keep you awake at night. Risk capacity, on the other hand, is how much risk you can afford to take based on your plan, based on your spending, on all that. Some people can't afford to take any risk because if they lose anything, it's going to blow their plan up. And so risk tolerance and risk capacity are a little bit different. They equate and ultimately factor into a plan in a similar fashion, but we need to make sure that there's not a big disconnect or mismatch of risk tolerance with risk capacity. Because some people are like, hey, man, I'll take all the risk, but they really can't afford it. Or they might say, hey, I don't want to take one iota of risk, but they really have plenty of room to take risk and would be better off to take some. And so sometimes there's a big mismatch there in what they could afford to take and what they're comfortable taking.
So, Jake, let's bring it all home here. People may have just joined us here. Of course, we're talking about risk in retirement. Do you think that it is a definite mistake to not take any risk in retirement?
You know, I would say for 90% of people, it's probably a mistake. There are a handful of people that simply have saved more money than they need, which is a great problem to have. And if they simply don't want to do that, they don't have to. And I have a handful of people like that. I've probably got a couple dozen people like that as clients where they're like, I don't want any risk at all, and it's okay if I earn a less return, but I just can't sleep at night if I know my money's in the market. And that's okay. That's your prerogative. But most people will benefit from having a little bit of risk, a little bit of safe, and just having a blend that fits their goals and gets them to where they want to be.
We've been talking with Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group. We've been talking about taking risk in retirement. If our conversation piques your interest a bit and you want to talk to Jake about risk capacity versus risk tolerance, or whether or not you're taking the proper amount of risk in your retirement plan, give us a call here and request your Floyd Financial Group retirement review. Absolutely no cost and no obligation. That number to call is 417-889-7233. You're listening to the program today on Saturday. You can go ahead and make that call anyway. All you got to do is leave your name and number, and Ashley will call you back during the week and set up that appointment for you. And again, absolutely no cost, no obligation, and no judgment. We'll meet you where you are. It's just a casual conversation with Jake to get your questions answered, to put you on a path towards a confident retirement. 417-889-7233. You can also find out more about us online at FloydFinancialGroup.com. Jake, out of time for this week. Once again, I want to thank you for your time, but most importantly, I want to thank our great listeners here in the last bastion of sanity, Springfield, Missouri, for joining us. So for Jake Floyd, I'm Jeff Shade, wishing you a great August weekend. Be sure to join us again next week right here with another edition of Show Me the Money on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
The information provided in the preceding program is for educational purposes only and is not intended as investment advice for any individual or entity. All information contained herein is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representations as to its completeness or accuracy. The opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Please consult your financial professional before executing any financial strategy. Financial planning is offered through Floyd Financial Group, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor.